right, so Nebraska baseball 1-2 at this weekend's Stillwater Regional. Apparently, like people like to say Obrate a lot. I just called it Stillwater a lot. Saw some folks make a trip over to Eskimo Joe's.
Oh yeah, very popular place.
Some Husker fans in attendance. There is probably 6 Florida fans. And I noticed while catching a little bit of the Oklahoma State Florida winners bracket game the first time around, it wasn't even full for that. What's going on down there? Do they only show up for the super regionals? No,
I don't know.
They've been to the College World Series a few times, but I didn't get the sense that it was this. I mean, it certainly wasn't a Fayetteville like sort of intensity to it. Either way, Nebraska baseball. And first, let me say, let's go through the baseball part of it first, and then we can go bigger picture and maybe tell some hard truths here. You got the first game against Florida on Friday afternoon, and I want to just say that I thought Brett Sears was like, I mean, for him to bear down and get what he got out of that start and only give up 3 runs, the way that team was hitting the ball against him, I mean, that hats off to that guy. That is how you pitch, man. Just fine. I mean, what'd they leave like 100 guys on base on Friday? And for Nebraska, they had to face a good pitcher, a guy that didn't have a real good ERA in the season, had been inconsistent, but obviously had some good top end stuff. And there starts your kind of differences between teams out of the SEC, teams like Florida, power programs like Florida, and Nebraska baseball. When we're talking about pitchers who aren't frontline Friday night guys, and Florida's, got one that they use in a different way because he is he happens to be a behemoth of a human, and he plays the field the other couple nights. Jack Caglione. Nebraska didn't see him on the mound, but the difference is after you get past your top 2, your 1-2, your Friday, Saturday in the rotation, then what happens after that? Well, everybody says, well, we're out of pitching, but the difference is those pitchers that come after that for Florida and those pitchers that come after that for Nebraska are different. There is a difference there. Just like there is a difference up and down the lineup. And now I want to also say this. It's probably unfair to compare yourself to Florida as a program, right? We went goo goo gaga over them last year at the College World Series. I was in their dugout and I said, this team is monstrous. I mean, they had Wyatt Langford at the time, and that makes a big difference as well. But physically, they're as put together of a athletically, they're as put together of a team as there is in college baseball, bar none. And I know what their record was this year, and I know how they did in the SEC, but they were always going to be able to hit. It's hard to ignore that when Nebraska's facing Florida head to head. And so this is where we get into the hard truths part.
And Florida got the right ballpark to hit in.
That's true. That's true. Nebraska pitching and defense didn't do enough.
Sure.
It wasn't like they were cheap shots. It wasn't like they had a lot. I mean, the one that went 119 miles an hour off the bat certainly was not a cheap shot. And Nebraska, unfortunately, had to deal with Jack Caglione at some point instead of just walking him. After the home run, they just chose not to deal with him anymore. But actually, I guess when his next at bat, he just flipped the bat out there and lined one off the base of the wall in left field. I'm like, what is this guy? What is he holds the bat like a toothpick. That's not how all the guys look like on Florida, but that's a big physical, athletic team. And so before we dive into all this, once again, let me say this. I think Will Bolt's doing fine. I think he's done a good job at creating teams who are pretty good at winning, playing his brand of baseball. He has created the team in his image. I think this team was a good example. They were pretty good 1-9 throughout the lineup. They got some timely hitting, and they got guys hot in various different points of the year. What Gabe Swanson did over the last 2 weeks was remarkable. What Josh Caron did in Omaha during the Big Ten tournament was remarkable. He didn't do much in Stillwater. Obviously, it was a very bad weekend for him. But they're winning games against the teams that they have to win against, and they're finding their way into the postseason. And if you could tell me basically every year the stock season for Nebraska baseball, the stock regular season for Nebraska baseball was that, high 30s wins, second place in the conference.
They won 40 this year.
I'm talking about regular season.
Okay, sorry.
High 30s wins, second place in the conference, and you took care of, you won some big RPI games early in the season because those are the only chances you're going to get at those. The only rub I guess I would have with it was that, if you're a Nebraska fan, you didn't beat your in-state rivals at a high enough level. So there was that piece of it. But if you're telling me that was the season, then I am fine with that.
I'll take that for sure.
I am fine with that.
Yeah.
They might win the Big Ten regular season some years. Obviously, they ended up winning the Big Ten tournament this year.
If you can do that enough years in a row, you'll get some in-state guys to stay. Not that there's huge prospects in state right now, but
there is.
You could develop it.
I think if you the first part of what you said, if you do that, if you put yourself in that position enough times in a row, sometime there's going to be a time where you get a couple good breaks and you end up in the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. I think that's what the real thing is for Nebraska baseball. It's going to come down to postseason. But here's the rub. Like I said, it's mildly unfair to compare yourself to Florida from an athletic perspective. They were the best looking team at the College World Series last year. But like I said, it's hard to ignore that when you're facing them head to head. I don't think Nebraska is capable. It is outside the realm of possibility that Nebraska could build that type of team. And because of that, they shouldn't try. And they're not, for the record.
Now let's get this out of the way. Connor, Nebraska was the 2 seed.
Yeah,
Florida was the 3 seed.
I'm not talking about records.
Nebraska's better.
I am not talking about records. What I am essentially talking about is recruiting rankings. That's essentially what I'm talking about. It's not about the record. Like I said, Nebraska plays in a different world than Florida does. Nebraska plays in a different world than Oklahoma State does. They will cross paths in February from time to time, and then of course they will cross paths again in hopefully late May and into June. So I don't think that Nebraska should strive to be that kind of team. I don't think that your chances of building a team that has multiple, first round draft picks with great arms and, top to bottom and like all this stuff. Like, I don't think Nebraska should try to be that because of where they're located and the conference that they play in. This is the hard truth. People wonder why we can't do 2005 again. And it's pretty simple. Nebraska's in the Big Ten. They're in the Big Ten, and it's a conference that, Josh was talking about local in-state guys. Even those guys have gone outside the realm of the state because they don't, while Nebraska baseball is cool and it's great to wear the N on your chest, and maybe Nebraska will get a guy or two that is highly touted from the area out of that range, they got Christo, highly touted guys. They'll get one or two of those, and they'll get enough of the in-state guys to have a successful team. The high leverage guys want to go play in high leverage situations, and they want to go play in the SEC, and they want to be surrounded by the best. Nobody wants to play in the conference, man. No, nobody dreams of taking weekend road trips to Rutgers. No, nobody does that, And I'm not saying that those teams can't have good postseason runs every now and again, and I'm not saying that Nebraska can't do it either. I'm saying that their margin for error is incredibly narrow compared to those teams. So you're always going to be at the mercy of what you get in postseason play and what you're matched up against and how the pitching falls. And even when you get to those situations, your margin for error is really, really thin. Nebraska could have lost 17-2 on Friday,
Yeah.
But they had a guy who could really pitch, and he found his way through five or six, right? Did Sears and you got Niagara, and everybody was out of pitching come Saturday. and you were going to have to score, 12 runs to beat that team. And like, who are you taking in a slugfest? We said this before the weekend. It was always going to be Florida. This is the Big Ten. That doesn't mean Nebraska can't make a run or get to a super or further one day, but it really has to line up for you, and you got to get really hot. And one thing that Nebraska can do is they can get a little bit deeper on the mound. They could use what is the talent at their fingertips, the coaching and the development at their fingertips to become a better, more complete team. But
that's where I'd like to see them really,
of course,
improve.
But if you are asking Nebraska's fourth starter to throw 96 and have a good Tuesday, like have a Tuesday guy that would throw 7 innings, every weekend, or hell, even have a Sunday guy that you could depend on and is going to be like a top 3 round draft pick, it's not happening. It's not going to happen. And so, like I said, don't get me wrong. This is going to be a competitive baseball team. Will Bolt is doing a nice job at Nebraska, and they are, I think they will continue to be a school with him and with Childress. They will be a place where you can come and you can maximize, right? Whatever you are, you can maximize that. But Nebraska should be okay with shooting for the best, to be the best team in the upper Midwest and the best team in the Big Ten. If you, and like Josh said earlier, if you do that enough, if you do it year after year, and if you put yourself in position enough and you get there enough and you are a 2 seed enough or a good 3 or whatever it might be, you make the NCAA tournament enough, you win the Big Ten enough, you will probably break through eventually. But don't get me wrong. The margin for error, the path to getting there is extremely narrow. It was always going to be extremely narrow. Nebraska had to be the 2-0 team this weekend. They had to get like 15 innings out of Brett Sears and Mason McConaughey. They started off losing, and they were never going to come back to win that regional. Maybe there was a way that they could have slugged their way to win that third game against Florida, but it's a really tough ask to beat 2 of those teams, and especially coming back from the losers bracket. So you got to get some things to go right. I'm not saying that my expectations for Nebraska baseball are lower. I'm just telling you that this is a hard truth. Like Nebraska is now a northeast facing program. It is not a south facing program. And people ask, like, well, how did Van Horn do it? And I mean, to make it pretty simple for you, they weren't in the Big Ten. Look around. I'm not saying that nobody from the Big Ten is ever going to make the College World Series or whatever it might be. I mean, Oregon might make it this year. Mm-hmm. Oregon's in the Big Ten, right, Josh? People forget about that.
Technically.
But you are, in essence, what you are as a program over a 5-10 year run is what you are being pushed by your competitors to do.
You can drop the first game in the Big Ten tournament and claw your way back because the competition isn't as good as Oklahoma State and Florida.
But I'm talking about like a big picture 40,000 foot view. You are going to be, you're finding a way to win in the company that you're in. So if Nebraska was still Nebraska and they were in the SEC, they would have to find a way to win in the SEC. Would they have better players? You bet. You'd bet they'd have better players if they were in the SEC. So like some of it is where you're located, but it's also the company that you keep. You are going to be pushed as far as your friends or foes, your enemies will push you. And Nebraska just doesn't, like, the conference doesn't, it's not pushing each other.
Many people in the chat right now asking, do the West Coast schools entering the Big Ten push the rest of the conference, or do they drag those West Coast schools down?
I would say it's probably a little bit more of the latter.
I would agree with that as well.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't have to spend however much money Oregon is. There was a report yesterday that Oregon spent like 4 times as much as any current Big Ten school on baseball this year. Oh, Oregon's going to realize, ooh, that's some money out of the budget that we can slash.
Yeah, I mean,
and still compete.
I want to talk about that too. I mean, can Nebraska or the Big Ten baseball programs invest more into baseball? Are they capable of it?
Sure. Absolutely.
Will they do it? No. It's not where their money is made.
They're
on BTN Plus every night.
Right.
The
conference's own network doesn't even really care about baseball, and there's no competition. They could broadcast a series every weekend, and they don't.
Like you said, we got a lot of comments here on the YouTube that I would love to get to, but let's take a phone call. Phone eats first, as they say. The 42 Degrees Source Hotline. Here's Chris. Chris, thanks for holding. What's up? Chris, you there? Oh, thanks for nothing, Chris. I pre-thanked him.
That's right.
I thanked him too early.
Let me tell you what Chris was going to say.
Okay, tell me what Chris
he was going to say. I don't like the soft expectations, Connor. I expect Nebraska to be great in everything. Essentially. The last part was a little bit editorializing on my part, but the soft expectations of being the best in the North.
I don't know what to tell you. Like, this is just what it is. This is just what you are. I can't explain it any way better than that.
You're a Northern baseball school.
Yeah. It's and maybe we should even stop doing the Northern thing, because I think it's the Big Ten, really.
Right.
Like it's you are in the Big Ten. You are in the Big Ten.
Let me do this then. Connor, Evansville is still playing baseball. Connor, Southeast Missouri beat Arkansas.
Nebraska could be Evansville. Like, Nebraska could have been Evansville this year.
Yeah.
Nebraska could have been.
That was a tough four-teamer in Stillwater.
Nebraska could have been SEMO this. They're better than those programs in general. If you play them over, like if Nebraska played Evansville over a 10-game stretch, Nebraska would win at least 7 out of the 10 times.
If they were played Friday through Sunday.
But Evansville's getting ready for a regional final right now. And so, like, sometimes baseball is weird that way. And in a one-game playoff format, the best team doesn't always win. And you get some things to break your way, or you got some soft teams around you, whatever, like some teams that had holes around you, whatever it might be. Like, I'm not telling you that Nebraska can't go to the College World Series. I'm telling you that they can. But what I'm also telling you is that it's going to be very hard and mostly lucky to get to the College World Series.
Need a little bit of dumb
There
luck.
is nothing wrong with that, because I think that's the best version of what Nebraska that's the best version of itself. You work with what you got, man. And this is what Nebraska has. These are the tools, these are the weapons that they have to go to war with. And to expect them to be Florida, to expect them to be Oklahoma State, to expect them to be Arkansas or whatever, it's not feasible.
Here's a question.
It's not feasible. Could you be Indiana State and have a great run of 2 straight years where you are a host in one year, and you are and a super regional team that year, and you are a 2 seed at a regional that probably should have hosted like the next year? Yes, of course, you could be Indiana State.
Those two teams should get together in the non-con, in my opinion.
Each other out.
Yeah, a little help each other out. A little 2-game midweek.
Little bracket buster.
Yeah,
something like that.
Josh in the YouTube chat, I think you can answer this question pretty well. Is the goal to only win against Big Ten teams or other power conference teams after making a regional? Like, you're going to build your team to win the Big Ten.
How?
Right?
Where do most of your games come from?
Yeah.
If you can't win the Big Ten, then you can't win. Like, you can't give yourself an opportunity.
It's like
you're giving yourself the best opportunity.
It's like when Nebraska football under Scott Frost was trying to run a play every 12 seconds, and the rest of the conference said, "Well, slow down, buddy. You got to play. You
learn how to speak Big Ten, buddy.
You got to win the conference.
You got to win against the teams that you need to win against to get to the point where you want to go. Because if Nebraska tried, if Nebraska like went for these, super, highly touted recruits who are going to leave after a year in the draft, or might be what you would be left with after all of the top ones commit to SEC schools or go to the draft is a bunch of highly thought of prospects that are referred to as gambles. You'd have a team full of gambles, and maybe one of them works out. So I think that or two or whatever, and maybe you hit, the lottery and they all work out and they all leave after 2 years and go to the draft or whatever it might be. I would rather take the safe route. I would rather take my 40 wins every year and roll the dice out there in the regional and hope the pitching matches up and hope you can get some timely hitting and advance your way into the second weekend. I think that's the more likely route that gets Nebraska to where fans ultimately want them to go, which is back to Omaha or in a super or whatever it might be. I'm telling you that Nebraska, if they stay on the track that they're on right now, if they do exactly what they're doing right now, that team can win enough games to eventually break through and end up in that second weekend.
If
I'm just saying
that 3, 4, or 5 years in a row.
Yeah.
You got to do it in a row. You can't have a down year and try and bounce back. Like, it has to be consistent in order for you to find the path that breaks right for you.
I'm just telling you that it's hard. It's going to be hard. And so that's the hard truth, I guess. I mean,
what a controversial statement.
I don't think it's that crazy.
It's hard to make the College World Series.
It's really, really hard. Meanwhile, by the way, in Greenville,
oh no,
Evansville has a 1-0 lead in Game 7.
Hello,
yeah, watch out about that 4 seed.
Dead
boy.
Center. Wow.
I don't know what's going to happen in college baseball today, but I know it's going to be wacky.
Yeah.
So yeah, we could touch on college baseball at large, and
I don't want to have to learn how to say that guy's name.
How about that? My guess would be that there is a combined 18 runs or more in that game.
Ooh.
How do you feel about that? Over under?
I would probably look at the over.
You'd look at the over for 18.
What's Allen got today? Oh, nothing.
Sal writes in on YouTube.
Hi, Sal.
He says, what are the portable things from season to season with a Will Bolt program?
Oh, good question.
Well, I mean, like, it is a good team. They have been good the entire time under Will Bolt, except for the year after 22, I guess.
Yeah.
Like they've been good.
The year I canceled them.
I guess I was 23 then, right? Like that's been a pretty good baseball team. And I think they're now starting to get they're really into, like, you know, the image of Will and stuff like that. Like, it's like I said, it's 1-9. It's not necessarily so top heavy where you're going to have, you know, all these guys hitting, you know, 30 dingers or something like that, and they're going to go top rounds in the draft, even though, I mean, hell, that was the look that they had a couple years ago or last year when they had Max Anderson and Bryce Matthews, and look where that, you know, put them. I'm not blaming them for Nebraska's failures that year. I'm saying Nebraska is better served. That ball is deep as well, by the way, but caught. I'm saying that Nebraska is served better to have a deeper team with the floor being higher, rather than trying to achieve this monstrous, unattainable ceiling. And frankly, I don't think it's all that different of a conversation for basketball at Nebraska either. But that's another topic for another day.
Couple people pushing back on the try to win the Big Ten. I don't know, narrative's not the right word, but a little pushback at this from Drake on Twitter. If Nebraska was not that Drake, if Nebraska was built to win in power conferences like the Big 12, SEC, or ACC, they would win the Big Ten.
If Nebraska was built to win in power conferences, they'd be consistently able to win in the Big Ten. It's harder. Yeah, but I'm telling you that you can't build to win the SEC in the Big Ten. You can't. It's impossible. The players aren't available to you. You can't do it.
You're not going to wow them.
Like, so you could try all you want, but you can't.
You're not going to wow them with, hey, you know, we go play in Ann Arbor. We go play in,
You're just not like you are better off. I mean, for I guess the football equivalent is like, you know, do we want to win the Big Ten or do we want to win the Big Ten West? RIP Big Ten West, but like think about this last year.
RIP.
Do we want to win the Big Ten or do we want to win the Big Ten West? Nebraska has decided that it's in baseball. They've decided that its floor is more important to them. And I think that is a correct assessment because of what they cannot achieve compared to its national level opponents. They're not going to win a national championship, guys.
Now, maybe this opens,
like the Ohio State of college baseball is, you're not going to compete with that team on a regular basis for recruits. I'm talking about for players. Could you beat them in a one-off situation? Sure. Why not?
Now, maybe California's
Nebraska's beaten the number one team in the country before in baseball. They've done it multiple times.
Yeah. Everybody said, remember they pushed Arkansas? They pushed Arkansas. Yeah. Maybe now California's open up a little bit. Like, hey, the West Coast schools, they didn't want you. Nebraska, we do want
But look at those schools. Look at those players at those schools. Yeah.
Like, it's a different type of play. It's not an SEC player.
No, they got a bunch of skinny second basemen.
Yeah.
That's the Pac-12. That's the West Coast winning baseball formula. They all look like the anteaters, But you know how UCLA did it? When they were rolling? Pitching. They had great frontline pitching, obviously, and it's just so happened to coincide with the time in which the bats didn't hit baseballs correctly. But yes, they had Garrett Cole and Trevor Bauer, and Nebraska. So Tony writes in. We got to take a break. Yeah. Tony writes in. He says, pitching is my top worry, but I trust Rob Childress with what he did in the early 2000s. Develop. Take those guys and take them to the next step. If they could do that with Brett Sears a year over time. Remember, Brett Sears was coming out of the bullpen with a 5 ERA last year. All right. And he turned into a frontline starter that could win every night out in the Big Ten on Friday night. Do that times 3. Do that times 4. Have a guy just get a little deeper on the mound. That's it. It's not like you'll win enough games to get you back in position. Trust me. You'll win enough games to get you back in position. And then you roll those dice out there again. And hopefully you don't get big, monstrous 6'6", 500-foot home run hitting giants in your first game of the regional. I have more, believe it or not, thoughts on this as we go on throughout the show. Maybe we will even touch on it with our good friend Mike Schaefer, who makes his return. Coming up on the Connor Happer Show on 1620 The Zone.
Live from the Host Coffee Studio, this is 1620 The Zone.
Funplex has asked me to give you a first